and River Basin Association. And yes, this meeting is going to be recorded because we're going to be able to have it available for other people to use and look back on for future uses. So yes, so thank you all for being here, and I'm very excited to get started on our whole lesson about trails today. So just a little bit about Dan River Basin Association. Dan River Basin Association's mission is to protect and preserve the natural and cultural resources of the Dan River Basin. You might be thinking, what is the Dan River Basin Association? Well, what is the Dan River Basin? The Dan River Basin includes 3,300 square miles of land, and it covers 16 counties in Virginia and North Carolina. As you can see on this map, it's very extensive. It includes the Dan River, the Mayo River, the Smith River, and other ones as well that you can see coming through. And they all flow into the Dan River that crosses the state line 8 times. So here are our steps on creating or focusing on our mission. So we protect and promote the Dan River Basin through recreation, education, and stewardship. So recreation includes First Saturday outings, which are free events that Dan River Basin Association puts on once a month for the public to go either hiking, paddling, or something of that nature. And anybody is welcome to come. You just sign up, and it's a great time, and you get to learn a lot, especially new and old people, or new and experienced users. We do trails and parks and river access constructions. We also do master planning for recreation plans, safety planning and training for all types of recreation. We also have an interactive map on our website that shows trails, river accesses, important historical markers, and things including like dams. And then another use of recreation that we have is land use planning as well. On to education. Some of the things that we use for education are Trout in the Classroom, a very popular program where students learn all about the cycles of a trout, and then they actually get to grow them themselves in the classroom. And here's a photo actually of them being released in the Smith River in Henry County. We also do streamside trees in the classroom. We do public workshops to have trainings about different stewardship and environmental programs. We also do private and agricultural land assessments. Citizens water quality monitoring is a way that we train regular citizens how to do water quality assessments so that we can keep an eye on what our streams and rivers look like around the basin, just to keep ourselves in check. We also do rain barrel workshops, and we also have corporate eco-learning opportunities as well. For stewardship, we do water quality testing along with us, as well as the citizens water quality monitoring users. We also have a water protector program. We're also involved in cleanups and riparian buffer assessments, as well as storm drain markings. So let's get into what we're here today for, trail development. So something that a lot of people ask is maybe like, what is a trail? I guess it just depends on your definition. So obviously here's a little change in direction. So Webster's dictionary just says series of signs and objects left behind, whereas a Forest Service has exact specs for what a trail would be considered, right? So there's a little bit of nuance about what is necessarily a trail. Is it just you walking? Is it just you walking in the woods? Could it be maybe a deer's walking in a deer trail in the woods, right? So like we're already using the word trail, and it's not necessarily what you would necessarily think a trail is, right? So some common trail uses you might have, you know, everybody has a different reason for being on the trail usually, and they're all good reasons, but you got to think about those when you're creating a trail or what your impact might be on a trail, right? So somebody who's just hiking with tennis shoes might have a little bit different of an impact than somebody on an ATV or someone with their dog, right? So these are all things that you think about while creating a trail. And I'm sure you all each have separate uses. And maybe if you don't, if the way that you use the trail isn't on here, drop it in the chat box because I'd love to hear it. Starting trails can be a little bit tricky sometimes, especially when it's on public land or is a public-private partnership. So usually how trails are successfully planned is through local recreation master plans, like the Dan River Basin Association does. So these type of things help with grants. You get extra points on that, especially if they're part of a local government's recreation plans, and it creates a more cohesive approach to what might be an entire trail system at one point, right? So Henry County has a Smith River Trail system, which all coincides, and they have matching trail signage, and it's all located on one website for Henry County, which is very helpful and creates less confusion, especially when there's new trail users to be sought out. Trails can also be created just by volunteers. For example, a neighborhood might make their own biking trail, which is really awesome. And you could do that if you have a full backyard that you're welcome for anybody to go and play on. IMBA, which is the International Mountain Biking Association, does a lot with trails. And they're actually one of the biggest leaders in that. And they have a lot of information that is very useful for even just regular trail users. It doesn't even necessarily have to be for mountain biking. Forest Service, obviously, and state parks also have their own master plans, but that can also be included when you're talking about a regional or local recreation master plan, is including like what a state park might look like around you. And then social trails. So this is where, you know, you're out fishing or something and you have this single way that you always go to your fishing spot, right? So that's just, it's called a social trail because it's not necessarily like a real built trail. But you know, you can tell that there's a need for a trail there. Sweet. So how do you pick where a trail goes? We kind of talked a little bit about this right now. So high interest in trails and walking areas, like a social trail. You might have a really great place that you think people need to see, and making a trail might be the way to get there, especially if it's not available by driving or something like that. Lots of historic places are off of trails. Recreation opportunities nearby, for example, like we were talking about, making a cohesive approach. If you think that there might be another trail that's about to be built nearby from a state park, maybe you would put one that would connect to that, and reach out to that state park to, you know, like collaborate on what that might look like. So now that you've maybe picked a place for your trail, let's think about what's next. So to plan out a trail, you always got to check out contour lines. Contour lines is topography of an area, which means hills and valleys and low places and high places, and maybe where there's a cliff or water, things like that. So just check, make sure you're looking at things like that. The most important thing is what you're looking for is to follow contour lines, right? So the singular line you're supposed to be following all the way through. And that makes it so that it's more sustainable. And we'll talk more about sustainable trails later. But to follow a contour line is the most sustainable way to keep a trail where it's at currently. Obviously, water areas. So for example, in this property, you can see that the Dan River is right here. Maybe if that's what you're looking for, put it near the river, but you also have to think about what if the river floods or something like that. And then property lines as well, especially if you get close to property lines, you have to be cognizant about who might be your other property owner on the other side. You never want to do bad for somebody else, you know. Always try to stay positive, and having a trail there that maybe is a little bit further away from their area might make them feel better about having a trail near them. So another thing, start laying out the trail. So once you see it overhead, now we go into going out there. So things that you bring are survey flags and tape, depending on what you want to do, especially if there's high grass or a lot of brush cover. Survey flags aren't going to work very well. Taping on trees on what side you want the trail to go would be very helpful. Things like clippers, just to make sure that you can get to where you need to go, especially if it's a densely covered area. And then something called a clinometer. So a clinometer measures the degree of how steep or how steep the grade is of that trail. And we'll get more into that later in this presentation. So while planning your trail, there are some things to consider other than just how sustainable the trail would be and where the contour lines are and the property lines, right? So we think about points of interest. So, you know, maybe there was a great patch of trilliums at the side of this mountain, and we would like to go over there. Any other features? Maybe, for example, we're going to have an overlook at a bateau landing. And that's going to be something that people would love to see. Those are considered positive control points, which are good things to go by, to go and stop. So maybe you pick those out first. And then the next thing is points to avoid. Property lines, right? We don't want to be encroaching on someone else's private property, endangered species. Although this area might be really great to have a trail at, maybe it shouldn't be, because a protected species is there, and we never want to destroy anything that is creating a significant contribution to the area. Dangerous areas, for example, cliffs. There's lots of poison ivy that you're not going to be able to get by, or water. And water can be a positive or negative control point, just depending on what you're thinking of. And all of these would be considered negative control points. So the goal is to create a trail that shares positive control points while staying away from negative control points. So maybe it might be a little bit difficult because that really cool tree that you want to see is right on the edge of a cliff. Maybe we'll think about that a little bit more and do a cost-benefit analysis there, right? Just thinking about who might use it and what type of safety that you're going to have there. That would help. While making a trail, some other things are thinking about who this trail might be for, right? Some people have a different impact or some users have a different impact than others. For example, horses and ATVs usually have a little bit more of an impact than like a normal hiker, right? Just depending on what the surface is and things like that. So we also think about the audience as, are they beginners? Are they intermediate or advanced? Or is this one that a lot of people are going to be able to use? So for example, like if you're in an area with not a lot of trails, maybe it wouldn't be a good idea to make a 15-mile trail that's super steep and has a lot of inclines, right? If you want to have a positive new user experience, we just have to cater to those type of people as well. And that doesn't mean that you can't have a section that's harder. You just have to make sure that it's labeled differently, right? Another thing to consider is this a local, is this going to be used as a local trail or more of a regional trail? So local trails are usually smaller, up to 1 to 5 miles. If you're looking for regional trails, they can be a little bit longer. So for example, a trail nearby, like Rockingham Community College has great trails on it. I don't think that people are necessarily going to be sought after this in like Guilford County and come up to just hike the RCC trails, right? It's a smaller thing, but it's great for the local community, right? A regional example would be, for example, the Appalachian Trail. Obviously, that is very long, but it attracts a lot of people because it is so long, and it causes them to spend a lot of time in the areas that they're at, right? Another thing, when we're talking about terrain, natural surface, paved or gravel, these are all different things that you have to think about when you're making a trail, because natural surface can depending on where you're at, like the natural surface might be rocky, it might be very dark, rich soil, which is great as well. Or it could be, sand, right? If you live at the beach, that could also be a consideration. Paved is always, when you're paving a trail, the general rule is that paving trails, you should be considered a road at that point. So it has to have the proper drainage like a road. So that comes into a lot of expenses at that point as well. And then gravel is perfect for a lot of using groups. And it does help pack down, especially if you're in an area where the soil type might not be conducive to trail making. Sustainability. So when we're thinking of sustainability, environmentally, right? We never want to hurt anything on a trail. We're trying to make the least amount of impact as possible on that area by making the trail. Some social sustainability. Who's going to use it? We have to think about our user experience, right? Who is this built for? If we're thinking about that, we need to make sure that we're streamlining that fully towards that group of people, or else it won't gain traction as well. And then economic sustainability. You don't want to be doing a lot of maintenance on this. We all know that, like local governments and parks and recs and state parks don't necessarily have a lot of money to be able to maintain a very, like messy or full of water trail. So things that we need to think about while we're making a trail are all these sustainability purposes. So when we say a sustainable trail, we're meaning environmental, social, and economically sustainable as well. Next step is making a trail. So things that make a trail sustainable off of the, if we're going back to the other side, is the economic and environmental sustainability. And this is what makes this trail sustainable for money and for the environment around it. So less than a 10% average grade on most sections, which is where we use the clinometer, right? So if it's too steep, water is going to immediately rush off of that onto the trail, and it's going to create ditches and wet areas that cause a lot more maintenance to be needed. Something to consider as well is a maintenance plan for wherever you're at. Whenever a trail is being made, you always have to make sure that there's somebody there in place to make sure that that trail stays maintained, or else it will not be available for the user group that you're looking for, and it will cost a lot more if it becomes a hot mess before you're able to fix it, right? So a maintenance plan is always in need. So for example, Dan River Basin Association, whenever a trail is being created, we always make sure that there is a maintenance plan in place. Somebody takes over it, like a Parks and Rec department, or there's a friends group. So for example, the Mountains to Sea Trail has a Friends of the MST that also go out and help maintain trail sections or reroute them as well, to make it better throughout the years and make sure that it lasts for a very long time. Outslope is the way that a trail is made where the water can shed off the hill, right? Grade reversals is something where it's undulating. The trail undulates so that water can, if it's shedding off on either side going down the trail, it has somewhere to go off the trail. And we'll talk more about this in a further section. And then maximum sustainable grade is the maximum steepness that trail is able to have while being sustainable, right? So, and this depends on tread. For example, if you look at this photo, this trail has a lot of rocks on it. It is able to be steeper because of the rocks in place. If it were something like dirt, all of the water that was running down that would immediately take all the sediment off and it would become a huge rut. And that is not sustainable. Sweet. So we talked a little bit about these things. So trail building jargon, and this comes with just learning and being part of groups that talk about trails a lot. So we'll talk about outslope, bench, 10% rule, and grade reversals. So bench and outslope. The bench is the section of the trail that's cut into the side of the either a hill or any trail. It doesn't necessarily have to be a trail, but a bench is the part that you create so that the top soil layer is off of the trail, and you're on hard packed surface. And the outslope creates, right, we talked about this a little bit, 5% tread outslope creates sheet flow off of the bench. And this creates less erosion on the trail and less sediment to be picked up, which is good for all of the sustainability portions that we talked about. So economically, socially, and environmentally. So less sediment being pulled off helps create a good ecosystem on either side of the trail. It costs less if you have less erosion because there's less maintenance needed. And then socially, more people would like to use a trail that looks good and has less erosion in general as well. So socially, it would be more sustainable and people would use it more. Next, grade reversals, rolling contour, and 10% rolls. So grade reversals and rolling contour are very similar. A gentle grade undulations on your tread creates so that the water gathers in the low section and comes off sheet flow wise, just in case any gets on the tread. And this makes it more sustainable because then there's less sections that are eroded than if you can only imagine what that entire section would be if you were going down the hill and you didn't put grade reversals in. While we're building, we think about hand built versus mechanical, and I'm sure you guys have seen this before in different places. A lot of conservation corps use hand built trails as well as mechanical, and these are things that you often have to consider if you're thinking about budgets and volunteers maybe. So hand built is usually a lot of volunteers and it does take a lot of energy. Technical areas, for example, if there's a lot of rocks or boulders or it's a remote area, this is a great way to get a trail in a section. And then mechanical, obviously it takes less people for that. It's similar to like a small skid steer that helps cut the bench in. But then there's always still a few hand building techniques that have to be completed afterwards to finish the trail. And it does take less time, but some negatives is that it is hard to navigate and transport. So remote areas, and places where there's tight pinch points, that's not necessarily going to work out. And you can always use a mix of the two. So when we're thinking of the whole overall overarching idea of steps to the trail, we have the trail planning, trail layout, rough cutting, which is where the bench is put in, and trees are removed or extra grass and things like that. Finishing work, roots, finishing a back slope. And we pack down the surface just to make sure that while the trail is being, started, that at least now the soil won't erode for the first part until users get out there and start packing down the soil for us. And then trail management is something that you must consider. We talked about maintenance scheduling, but some other things go along with that is adopting a friends group for the trail, wayfinding signs, trailhead signs are all important parts to creating a trail. So if you don't have trail signage or accessories, people are probably not going to want to visit because they probably won't know what's going on. So an important thing that has to be thought out before you build is a trailhead. So a trailhead is where you start the trail. Will it be you start at one section, if you start at one area and then you end at another area, or will it be a loop that comes all the way back around to the same trailhead? So these are things to consider as well. And it also depends on how many signs that you might need for wayfinding. So a trailhead sign usually looks something similar to, for example, check out this Woodland Trail sign. It has a map, a description of the area that you're in, usually a little bit of historical significance to it. And you always have to make sure that you have maybe rules or emergency information on it as well. And so a lot of people use this, and I will even do this. I take a picture of it before I go on a trail just to make sure I'm going in the right direction. And they should be big and easily seen because this is where people are going to look for your trail, right? So if I don't see a very big sign, I'm probably not going to find it, especially if I'm trying to find parking as well, right? So wayfinding signage is similar. I'm sure a lot of you have seen blazes before. So that's like where either there's a plastic or metal medallion on a tree or on a post, and it says, maybe it's just like a color, green color, or maybe it's got the emblem of the trail that you're on. And it could also be something just as easy as like a spray painted square on a tree, right? So that just makes sure you're going in the right direction. And that depends on how many you need for the user that you have. So you might need more if it's a beginner area, and maybe less once you get into a group that's maybe closer to an intermediate level. So there's also different types of wayfinding material that you can find. Maybe there's like a halfway point or there's a fork in the trail that you have. And for example, at the top right corner up here at Night Brown Nature Preserve, in one of their loops, they have like another supplementary map that says you are here in this next loop that's about to go around, and has a sign underneath that says the trail that you're about to go on, which can be very helpful, especially if you have larger loops that come off or other trails that split off. And then some other accessories would be interpretive signage. For example, on this center middle-ish area is an interpretive sign that I created for a school's trail that is going to be used for trails K through 12. And it's an educational experience in the outdoors for students. So this one is all about the plants like flora that you might find in this area. And it has a description of what that plant might be, what it might look like, as well as some sort of sensory experience as well with it. for example, a fern, can you like feel the fronds? I explain what a frond is, and then they go out and find a frond that they can touch and see how it feels. And this is very helpful for people who maybe have a shorter hike, that would like to experience a little bit more of nature, especially beginners when they don't necessarily know a lot about the outdoors maybe, or where they're at especially. Yeah. So some frequently asked questions that I might be able to explain for you all. Something that a lot of trail builders lingo have is this thing called blow and go. This is basically the idea that people, especially if they aren't necessarily knowledgeable about how trails are built sustainably, just go out and use their lawn blower, and blow off the leaves on the ground and call it a trail. And it's not necessarily that is the only way that people make what is considered blow and go, but that's a simplified version of it, where like sustainability maybe wasn't even thought about. Maybe they hadn't even talked about the property with the person who owns it, and things like that to consider. Fall line trails, this is a type of trail that is a very unsustainable trail, right? So when we talk about 10% average grade on your trail, this goes way past that. In our contours, right, they all run parallel to each other. This is where a fall line trail runs vertically through all of the parallels, right? They just cross perpendicularly through the contour lines, and that creates basically a huge rush of water, usually when it rains or there's precipitation of any sort, and this severely erodes an area. So for example, in this photo right here on the right, this is a fall line trail. You can tell because it's just going straight down the hill, right? That's something we do not look for in a trail. We're looking to avoid things like that, just because that's going to cause a lot of maintenance issues. And I'll think about where all that sediment is going at the end. It's displacing a whole community of plants that might be able to live up at the top of that area, and now they're no longer able to because they've been misplaced. Something else to consider is trail difficulty ratings. And this can be similar depending on if you all have ever skied before. You can make trail difficulty ratings based off of what you have nearby, but there's also trail difficulty ratings, off of like the All Trails app, right? So that just depends usually on a few things: how steep it is, how long it is, and what the user experience is supposed to be, right? So always consider that when you're thinking about making a trail, is maybe putting that out there for people to know like what their expectations are. And maybe don't just say, oh, it's an easy trail. Say why it is considered an easier trail or less difficult, right? So it's less difficult because it's a paved surface, it's not steep, and there's a lot of rest stops on it, right? There's plenty of benches to sit down and rest. Whereas something that might be hard or extremely hard, there's lots of steps. There's a 14,000 or 1,400 foot elevation gain in a quarter of a mile, things like that. It's 10 miles long, right? So things to consider with that trail difficulty ratings. Frequent trail mistakes. And this is just anyone and anybody can do these things. So social trails, right? We talked about this at the beginning. People make their own social trails even on regular trails. So think about if you've ever been on a switchback, which is where the trail goes up on a hill and then turns immediately and goes back up the other way. Think about how many times you've seen someone cut straight up that hill, right? That is considered a social trail as well. And that would be considered an unsustainable trail. So there's a reason why we put those things in. So just think about that next time. If you see a cut through and you're like, man, that looks like the easier way. Well, maybe it's not the most sustainable way, right, for a trail to be used. Trail mistakes, other confusing trail maps. Always, if you're ever confused about what a good trail map looks like, consult someone who is able to make maps, maybe a GIS person or a local trail builder, and they'll be able to help you with trail maps. And blazes are always important, so consistency is key for those type of things. And trail mistakes, obviously an unsustainable trail, but that mistake can be fixed by rerouting. Something else to think about and consider when you're at a trail, or if you're making a trail as well, is the history of the land. So important facts. These are things that you might consider being put on your trailhead signs. Important facts. Were there indigenous people who owned this land before? Has this area been sought after through gentrification? Who owned the land before this, or was it donated? And then previous uses. So, for example, we just had a bateau landing park being created, and it used to be used for use of parking bateaus to get agricultural things throughout the Dan River. So that's pretty awesome. And something to note while being in the outdoors is, it's not just being in nature. You're trying to learn and gain knowledge about who you're with and what you're using the trail for, and have an appreciation for what you're doing, right? So here are some ways that you can get involved in trail making. Adopt a trail with DRBA. This is always a very popular thing. Please hit us up if you're welcome to adopting a trail with us. There's plenty of trails out there that always need help, or joining a local trail group. So obviously us, please consider joining DRBA. The Mountains to Sea Trail has a friends group. The Appalachian Trail also has a few, and state parks and forests also have groups of volunteers that assist them with things like this. Something else that you can do that maybe isn't just about building is talking to your local constituents about the importance of trails. We're always trying to get funding for trails and areas and parks and recreation for everyone. And, having local constituents that are able to hear that and agree with you, and especially if it's coming from one of you, it means a lot. IMBA, so the Mountain Biking Association, also has a great group of people for that. And also consider taking an RCC Trails class. That's how I've learned most of my trail knowledge, and I thought it was very helpful. They have all types of trail classes, so go and check that out. This is actually one of my trail classes that I took in the spring, and it was so informative, and I had a great experience. So the resources that I used, check out Trail Solutions, IMBA's Guide to Sweet Single Track. They have great photos and drawings of what sustainable trail use looks like, and sustainable trail building that you have to purchase. But there's also this free Forest Service trail construction and maintenance book, which is very helpful as well. So let's see. Let's show up. Yep. So you could check it out on their website. They also have their own webinars as well. And then let's see. And then let's check out. So this is great because it has hyperlinks to each of the areas. So this is the Forest Service construction and maintenance notebook, which is also very helpful. And you can go to specific things that you want to learn more about, right? So I want to learn more about outsloping. Here we go, rule of thumb, all of these things. They've got great pictures as well. So check them out. It's a lot of fun. I wouldn't say it, I wouldn't think it would have been interesting before I took trails classes, but now I look at trails differently all the time, and I'm always craving more knowledge about like how this trail was built, or how maintenance might go on this trail. So it's always something cool to consider when looking back on it. So thank you again for joining us today, and I hope you guys have learned a little bit. If there's any questions, I'll answer them now.
Anna, there's a question. What's been one of your favorite or most interesting trails you've hiked or used, and what made that trail stand out in your mind compared to others?
That's a good question. So one of the most interesting, I would probably say, was I'm trying to think. There's this one in Dragon's Tooth, I would say, is very interesting because there's a lot of rocks. It's rock scrambling, and you go up pretty steep, which it was very cool to see how the steepness wasn't causing erosion because it was rocks up at Dragon's Tooth off of the Appalachian Trail. And that was like some of my first knowledge about like how different trail treads change an experience, and maybe how you build a trail. And then, is there another question?
No, it's you have a thank you. You had some great slides.
Oh, thank you. And then I think is there a predictable range of cost per mile for trail building projects factoring in trail surface? This is gonna depend from area to area, especially on trail builders. But it's usually you do it by foot. And this is just for trail building. This isn't necessarily just for scoping out the trail and doing trail surveys beforehand, but depending on if it's mechanical versus hand built, it's good to budget in between $5 to $10 per foot of trail, and that just depends on, that is just natural surface. So if you're adding gravel or something like that, you have to add the cost per ton for that as well. And then obviously paving, that is a whole nother situation that I do not have any knowledge on at this point. So yeah. But I think that's about it. But thank you all so much for coming today. And I hope you have a little bit more trail knowledge than you did before. And maybe you'll look at trails a little bit differently now that you've learned a little bit about how they're built. So thank you so much. And if you have any questions or would like to follow up with anything about Dan River Basin Association, my email is right here, awheeler@danriver.org. And I hope to see you next time on our next Lunch with DRBA.